I want to say to Christine and to her children that this government will not rest, none of us will rest until we have brought Bob home. I look forward, as do so many, to that day of celebrating with them and celebrating with all of Bob's friends and his former colleagues. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I would suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Akaka. Well, as work continues on the transportation bill, Senate lawmakers will take a break from that at 5 Eastern for a closed-door briefing with Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano. She's scheduled to give an update on cybersecurity efforts. We're hearing that it'll last about 90 minutes. So there'll be a 90-minute recess for that, again, starting at 5 o'clock Eastern. On the same topic, FBI Director Robert Mueller said today that terrorists may seek to train their own recruits or hire outsiders with an eye toward pursuing cyber attacks on the United States. Terrorists have not used the Internet to launch a full-scale cyber attack, but we can't underestimate their intent, Mueller said in prepared testimony to a House Appropriations Subcommittee. He said terrorists have shown interest in developing hacking skills and that the evolving nature of the problem makes the FBI's counterterrorism mission more difficult. So again, Senate lawmakers will get a chance to hear more about that issue at 5 Eastern. And that'll last about 90 minutes. There'll be a 90-minute recess for that. So again, as work continues on the $109 billion service transportation bill in the Senate, we spoke with a reporter just a short time ago to find out the status of the negotiations.
We're joined by Fawn Johnson, contributing correspondent for National Journal. All the news about the surface transportation reauthorization bill seems to be coming out of behind-the-scenes discussion.
I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that James Ward from my office be granted floor privilege for the duration of today's session.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the chair. First, Mr. President, I want to say how important roads and bridges are. We are on the highway bill, and that is one of the main advantages the United States has had, having excellent transportation. And of course, that's particularly important in my own state because we want people to be able to get to the first national park, which was Yellowstone National Park, and another gorgeous park, Grand Teton National Park, and a place called Fossil Butte National Monument where people can actually fish for 60-million-year-old fish. And we have a spot in the middle of the state where people can help dig up dinosaur bones. And if you dig one out by yourself, you get it named after you. Or the first national monument, Devil's Tower, which is up in the northeast corner. And of course, we're a corridor between those western states, too. So we know how important roads and bridges are. And we need to do that. And we need to do it now. But we should do it the right way. So I want to refer to an amendment that I've filed, number 1645. My amendment's very simple and straightforward. It would allow the gas tax to be adjusted with inflation. Not with the price of gas, with inflation. This isn't a new idea, and it certainly isn't a very popular discussion point. But this is the debate the Senate needs to have. The long-term viability of the Highway Trust Fund is incredibly important to our states. The underlying proposal the Senate is debating would pay for transportation and infrastructure projects and programs for the next 2 years, but it doesn't address the future of these programs, nor do the financing proposals fit within the time frame of the bill. I have serious objections to paying for 2 years of spending with 10 years of revenue. Let me stop on that issue for a moment. We are spending money in 2 years that it will take us 10 years to generate. How can we tell the American people that we're serious about the deficit and serious about spending when we allow money to be spent 5 times as fast as it comes in? If the Senate wants to keep the highway program viable through a trust fund instead of subjected to the general fund, which any accountant or banker would say is bankrupt, we need to either cut spending or generate more revenue. Those are the 2 choices. A lot of work has gone into the bill before the Senate. 4 committees have worked on it. 4 committees have filed amendments that have been included in the version that we're seeing. I appreciate that many of my colleagues are trying to reduce the mandates on the states as well as consolidate and eliminate programs. That's good. Those are steps we need to take. Even with some serious streamlining, however, the Highway Trust Fund will not have the revenues how they prioritize the federal funds they receive. We should not and cannot ignore that with this bill, we're just buying time. Buying time is something the federal government has been doing for decades, and that's gotten us into this serious financial mess. We're buying time with borrowed money, and the borrowing's pretty dubious, and some of it's from countries we'd rather not be borrowing from. I want to share some charts with you. You may only be able to discern what I say, and what I say is what appears in the Senate Journal, not the charts. These have a lot of numbers on them. I'm an accountant, so I get really excited over numbers, but too many numbers, but it still makes the point. What we have here are the Highway Trust Fund balances. Starting in 1993, which is the last time that a gas tax was passed by us, and that was 18 3/10 cents. And this column shows the total revenue receipts, and for the most part they've been going up, which means that more gas has been bought. But here are the expenditures, and you'll see what effect that's had on the closing balance in the trust fund. We've had quite a few years when there was some money in there right after 1993 when the gas tax more closely matched up with the cost of construction. And as we get out here into 2001, we can see that it drops significantly and keeps dropping, and the balance at the end of 2012 is going to be $11 4/10 billion. And of course, we're spending more than that just in this one bill. So next year, it'll be a minus $2 8/10 billion, then 18 7/10 billion, and then 34 7/10 billion. These are deficits I'm talking about, deficits in the trust fund, which means in those years we're going to have to get the money from somewhere else. Winds up in just 2016 it being a $50 7/10 billion deficit to the trust fund. That's what we're doing generally with all of our accounting, but it shows up here in something that I don't think anybody in America denies is absolutely necessary. We have to have the roads and bridges. So if my amendment were enacted, what kind of adjustment to the tax rate would we see? If this amendment had been enacted last year, in 2011, this January, because the tax doesn't go into effect until the January after the inflation is measured, this January the tax would have increased by 1/2 of 1 penny. 1/2 of 1 penny. The price of a gallon fluctuates more than that on a daily basis. In fact, I was watching on television the other night, and the lady was showing the high price of gas and showed a sign out in front of the pumps. And just as she was about to leave, she said, "Wait a minute. While I've been talking, the price has gone up 20 cents. So we're seeing some huge changes there, but not with the gas tax. If we had enacted the indexing in 1993, the last time Congress adjusted the gas tax, there would have been an increase of 11 cents in the gasoline tax over 19 years. Excluding the 1/10 of a cent that's added to the base tax rate for the leaking underground storage tank, the rate would adjust from 18 3/10 cents per gallon in 1993 to 29.5 cents per gallon today. And that's what this chart shows. It shows the amount of inflation that there was each of those years, and so the amount that the gas tax would have gone up in each of those years to provide a fund that would actually help us with building the roads and bridges. It'd be at 29 5/10 cents per gallon today. In that same time frame, gasoline prices have risen from $1 per gallon to $3.50 per gallon or more. That was $4 in that example I was giving off of television. If we had enacted indexing in 2005 under the last highway bill, there would have been only a 3.5 cents per gallon adjustment. I estimate there would have been increased revenue in the Highway Trust Fund by over $18 billion from the gas tax alone. So this is a chart that shows what would have happened had we indexed it in 2005, what the CPI index would have been, and what the adjustment would have been. So that would have been a change of 3.5 cents per gallon, hardly noticeable in the price of gas that we have today. But the trust fund would have had $18 billion, which is what we need to have to be able to spend. It's very important. In 1993, the gas tax of 18 3/10 cents was included in the $1 of gas. And there was also state taxes included in the $1 of gasoline price. 18 cents out of $1. Now the 18 cents is part of $4 a gallon. Don't you think construction costs have increased based on the cost of a gallon of gas alone? Remember, the gas tax is what's paid for roads and bridges, but can't anymore, causing us to use very bad financing methods, stealing from pension funds with no way to pay it back, using 10 years of projected revenue to pay for 2 years of construction. What do we do for the money in 2 years? Roads and bridges will always need construction. Our economy runs on construction. The construction industry has mixed feelings about my proposed amendment. They are for it as long as it does not bring the bill down. My intent is not to bring the bill down, but rather to make it a viable bill. Of course, my amendment will not make it a viable bill all by itself. The Bowles-Simpson deficit report said we needed to increase the gas tax by 5 cents a year for 3 years to have a viable fund. And here are the quotes from that deficit commission. The president appointed the deficit commission. They looked at everything, and on highways and bridges alone, this is what they came up with: 15 cents per gallon increase in the gas tax over a 3-year period. Limit spending to match the revenues the trust fund collects. That's what we're failing to do in this current bill. Once fully implemented, a 15-cent increase would generate an additional $24 to $27 billion per year for the Highway Trust Fund. Each 1 cent increase would generate about 1 6/10 to 1 8/10 billion dollars per year. That's from that deficit commission that was trying to figure out how to get ourselves out of the hole that we're in right now. And this was what they came up with just for the highway fund. So with my amendment that just indexes it to inflation, doesn't start until next year, is just a way to test the water to see if there's enough courage in this body to take a very minimal step. My amendment doesn't solve the shortfall of the Highway Trust Fund, nor would it fully pay for this legislation. It's just a small step in the right direction. It's a step in getting the Highway Trust Fund back to what it was created to be, a dedicated pot of money to pay for the roads, funded by those who use the roads. We need to take this step and a lot of other steps if we're going to fix our money problems and fund programs as intended. The National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, that's that Simpson-Bowles Commission, supported a 15-cent increase in the gas tax to be gradually adjusted over a 3-year period. Once fully implemented, a 15% increase, as I said, would provide $24 to $27 billion per year. That's what we need for roads and bridges. The Commission also recommended that Congress enact a limitation so that the spending could not go beyond revenues. Seems like a fairly common sense approach. Spend only what you generate. We could really use that around here. Of course, that principle is something we need to enact in the overall budgeting in Washington. Let's be clear here. The tax rate and gas prices are two very separate issues. Folks might think that as the price of fuel goes up, so does the federal gas tax. And that is not true. Whether the price of gas is $1 per gallon or $4 per gallon, the federal tax remains the same. Again, the fund collected 18 3/10 cents from every dollar of gas in 1993. Construction costs have increased, and now we only collect the same 18 3/10 cents for a $4 gallon of gas. And if we were really being successful at some alternate means of transportation, the amount of gas would go down as people use those other ones, but it isn't. I'm sensitive to the fact that the gas prices are high right now, and I'm always looking for ideas on how we can work to bring those prices down. With the distances we have to travel in Wyoming alone, high fuel prices have a disproportionate effect on the residents of my state. The President said there isn't a silver bullet to bring the prices down. That's certainly true if you look at his administration's policies with having done everything possible to increase the price of fuel. While there might not be a silver bullet, there is a number of actions that will make a real difference. One reason that gas prices are high is that the supply is limited, and tensions in the Middle East have further strained that supply and encouraged speculators. To fix the supply problem, we should be producing American energy wherever it's possible. Instead of blocking production, the President should be encouraging us to develop American energy in Alaska and off the outer continental shelf and on federal lands. Yes, production is up, but it's not from federal lands. That's shut down. It's coming from private land where a permit doesn't take a lifetime of investment and delay. Federal lands are down 12% in production. We should be enacting policies that encourage energy production on public lands in Wyoming and other western states, rather than relying on oil from the Middle East and Venezuela. President Obama should approve the Keystone XL pipeline so we can get as much supply as possible from friendly nations like Canada before they feel forced to sell it all to China, who's buying up energy worldwide. China understands that in 20 years, the country with the energy will have the power. And I'm not talking about electrical power. I'm talking about world power. Gas prices are high because of the regulatory uncertainty created by the administration's relentless pursuit of policies that are designed to make energy more expensive under the guise of halting climate change. Rather than arguing over new taxes for the oil and gas industry, we should be working to rein in the Environmental Protection Agency to stop those regulations that make it impossible for businesses to plan. Now, we have a permitting problem. When I hear the lecture that the number of acres leased for exploration but not being drilled, I get angry, and I'm usually not angry. Leased parcels include land that has no oil. When you buy a lease, you buy a package, and then you drill where the oil or gas is within that package. Also, there are millions of acres ready to be drilled, but the leaseholder can't get the bureaucrats to turn loose of the permits. Of course, Energy Secretary Chu recently confirmed that his energy policy is to create conservation by having our gas prices reach the same level as Europe. Well, unless we do something with the gas tax, at his desired $7 a gallon, we'll still only get 18 3/10 a gallon for the Critical Highway Fund. If we were really trying to match cost to construct with revenue, the radical suggestion would be for the gas user fee, and it is a user fee. You don't drive on the road, you don't need to buy the gas, you don't need to pay the tax. So it's a user fee. But it would be a percentage of the cost of a gallon of gas if we were really being radical. But be clear, we are not doing that. Probably not doing any of this. We need to do everything we can to lower gas prices, and I'm working to do just that. In fact, we're debating some of those issues on this legislation because the majority refuses to debate them using regular order. However, the issue of gas prices is entirely separate from the issue of determining how we should pay for highways. We've set up a trust fund that's supposed to take care of road and bridge needs. And I might mention that changing the formula to miles driven would just be to increase the gas user fee while hiding the increase. That's not the way to do it. We should be honest about whatever kind of an increase we're putting on this user fee. So that's the wrong way to do it. If we don't add more revenue to the trust fund, we should cut our spending to the amount of money we have in the trust fund. That's, again, what the Simpson-Bowles report said. Now, I know there are a lot of sensitivities in talking about the rate of gas tax or any other tax. There's no doubt that individuals and businesses are still stressed in this economy and are struggling to make ends meet. People in rural states like Wyoming have few options, driving long distances for many of their needs. Several of my colleagues have said to me, this just isn't the time to be talking about the gas tax. I must ask, when will the time be right? Members of Congress don't want to tackle this topic when the economy is strong, nor do they want to tackle the topic when we have economic challenges. When revenues to the Highway Trust Fund were meeting the needs of the highway program, no one wanted to consider that there might be a time when the revenue couldn't keep up with the needs to maintain our highway system. We are pennies away from insolvency of the Highway Trust Fund. When's the right time to talk about the revenue stream for the Highway Trust Fund? We need to start today. My amendment's a small step to address this long-term viability of the Highway Trust Fund. It's a small step to get us moving to living within our means and maintaining our roads with the money we have, not the money we wish we had. I probably can't get a vote on this minimal increase, but it does test the water. I'd be happy to revise my amendment to any reasonable level that senators would support. We cannot continue to kick this conversation down the road for another 2 years. We cannot lie to our constituents about the state of the Highway Trust Fund. We shouldn't steal from other trust funds. And we shouldn't do unapproved long-term financing for short-term projects. We have a mechanism to pay for the road programs, a dedicated funding stream paid for by those who use the roads. I hope my colleagues will take a hard look at my amendment, take a look at the plan under Simpson-Bowles, study the numerous ideas out there. Let's have a debate on how to preserve this dedicated funding for our roads. In Wyoming, we have an optional sales tax for projects by communities and counties. The construction project is stated, and the people get to vote for this increase in their taxes. Now, as long as the money is used to pay for the promised projects, the voters continue to approve additional projects with additional taxes. It's happened for 30 years in Wyoming. People will allow focus taxes for what they know they need if they believe that that's what it will be spent for. And I say that they know the need for roads and bridges. When is it the wrong time to do the right thing? I believe most everyone in this chamber knows this is the right thing. Most of our constituents will see it that way too. A vocal few won't. But the reason congressional approval is at a record low is because so many of us live in fear of taking the votes that will fix the problems. We have a chance to change that with this amendment. I hope my colleagues will take a serious look at it and fund the Highway Fund the way it was intended. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
At about 5 p.m. Eastern Time, about an hour and a half from now, the Senate is expected to go into recess so lawmakers can attend a closed-door briefing on cybersecurity issues. And there's still no agreement on how to move forward on the transportation bill. We talked with a reporter about that.
We're joined by Fawn Johnson, contributing correspondent for National Journal. All the news about the surface transportation reauthorization bill seems to be coming out of behind-the-scenes discussions. What are you tracking today?
Well, the main thing that we're watching is to see what happens in the House. They have been having trouble figuring out just how to get a large surface transportation bill through their caucus. And there's been some questions about whether or not they would have a long-term bill, which would be about 5 years, or whether they would have to shorten it to as short as 18 months. The House Republicans very much want to tie surface transportation legislation to new domestic oil drilling, which they feel is a good political point to be making. That, of course, will not pass muster with Democrats, so they need to make sure that they can get all of the Republican caucus on board. They're having a little trouble with that, from what I understand.
Well, the Republican conference had a meeting today. What do you know, what happened there?
As I understand it, House Speaker John Boehner told the members that the only option that would actually pass the House with the help of the Democrats is a bipartisan bill that's being debated in the Senate right now. And he put forward the other options that are on the table, asking them to please decide which one they would like to go for. They may be going back to the drawing board and trying to do what they did a couple of weeks ago, which is to pass a longer-term bill without a measure that had some difficulties with some members of the caucus about transit. So the idea is a 5-year bill to reauthorize the federal highway program, keeping mass transit in it for the time being, and then using energy drilling to pay for the shortfall that won't be made up with the Highway Trust Fund. They had trouble with that a couple of weeks ago, so it's not clear to me exactly what's different now, but they seem to be thinking that they can muster some votes over the recess that they have next week.
Why did the Speaker pull Representative John Mica, the House Transportation Committee Chairman, off to replace him with Bill Schuster in the negotiations on this?
Well, I think there was a little bit of confusion about whether he actually pulled him off. Technically, John Mica is still on the bill, and he will be the sponsor of whatever actually passes out of the House, unless they just decide to punt and take the Senate bill. What is happening, though, is that John Mica has been saying for weeks and months, actually, that he's in charge of making the transportation policy. He's not in charge of getting the funding or the votes for it, and that's really where the action is. So to say that John Mica has been pulled from the bill is a bit of an overstatement, but it isn't entirely inaccurate to say that essentially John Boehner is looking to find whoever he can, and Bill Schuster is a very good person to go and get the votes that he needs from the freshman members of Congress.
Let's look over to the Senate for a second. That's a much different bill. It's a 2-year reauthorization bill. What can you tell us about the status there?
Well, it's going on a long, slow slug towards passage. They're still debating about what the number and type of amendments that can be put on the bill. Last I checked, they didn't have a deal on what those amendments would look like, but aides on both sides say that they're getting close, and I think they will get one. Most of the amendments that Republicans are wanting to offer probably won't pass, so it's more a chance for making a political message. So eventually I think that they will pass that bill. It is a bipartisan bill. It passed out of the Environment and Public Works Committee on a unanimous vote. There are some Republicans who have a little bit of questions about the actual funding involved in it, and they're going to need a little bit of time to look at it and make sure that it doesn't violate any of their conservative principles.
Fawn Johnson is a contributing correspondent with National Journal. You can read her work at nationaljournal.com. Thanks for that update.
You're welcome.
And the pending business remains in the Senate, the surface transportation bill. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta testified today before the Senate Armed Services Committee about Syria. The Associated Press writes that the Defense Secretary pushed back against fresh demands for U.S. military involvement in the country. And they say that they want to end President Bashar Assad's deadly crackdown on his people. Those are the members of Congress. Here's a bit of what Secretary Panetta said today before the Senate Armed Services Committee.
President, Mr. Secretary, President Obama issued a presidential directive stating, quote, the prevention of mass atrocities is, quote, this is a presidential directive, a core national security interest of the United States. That's the administration's policy. With at least 7,500 and possibly more than 10,000 dead, with Assad using tanks, quote, gaining momentum according to General Mattis, would you agree that mass atrocities have occurred and are occurring in Syria?
I don't think there's any question that we're experiencing mass atrocities there.
So the President said yesterday he's taken no options off the table, and you said in your opening statement that includes, as I mentioned, potential military options if necessary. Can you tell us how much longer the killing would have to continue? How many additional civilian lives would have to be lost in order to convince you that the military measures of this kind that we are proposing necessary to end the killing and force to leave power? How many more have to die? 10,000 more? 20,000 more? How many more?
I think the question, as you stated yourself, Senator, is the effort to try to build an international consensus as to what action we do take. That makes the most sense. What doesn't make sense is to take unilateral action at this point. As Secretary of Defense, before I recommend that we put our sons and daughters in uniform in harm's way, I've got to make very sure that we know what the mission is. I've got to make very sure that we know whether we can achieve that mission, at what price, and whether or not it will make matters better or worse. Those are the considerations that I have to engage in, and obviously the administration believes that every effort ought to be made to deal with those concerns in the international setting, to try to build a kind of international consensus that worked in Libya and that can work in Syria if we can develop that.
Well, let me tell you what's wrong with your statement. You don't mention American leadership Americans should lead in this. America should be standing up. America should be building coalitions. We shouldn't have statements like, quote, that we are not going to intervene no matter what the situation is, such has been, at least up until now, the statements by the administration and the president. In past experiences, those that I mentioned before, America has led. Yes, we has been multilateral and multinational, as is absolutely vital. We're not leading, Mr. Secretary. General Dempsey, again, I hear the same old refrain that I've heard for many, many years. Quote, it's not clear what constitutes the Syrian armed opposition. That was the same argument that this administration used for not intervening in Libya at the beginning. And by the way, I might add that the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Libya are former professors at the University of Alabama, far better than being from Senator Lieberman's alma mater. But anyway, so we can find out who they are. We can find out who they are. They're not fighting and dying because they're al-Qaeda. They're not fighting and dying and sacrificing their lives because they're Muslim extremists. They're fighting and dying because they want the same universal rights and freedom that we guaranteed in our Constitution. So I reject the argument that we, quote, don't know who they are. We spend a lot of money on defense and we spend a lot of money on intelligence. We should know who these people are, and it would be easy enough to find out. And the best way, of course, to help them organize is to provide them with a safe haven where they can organize and train and equip. We're allowing I was interested in your answer, and I'll conclude with this, that, well, sooner or later Assad will fall. I don't disagree with that. Meantime, he's gaining momentum. He's regained Homs. The death count goes up, and the atrocities continue. And yet the President says a core national security interest of the United States is the prevention of mass atrocities. Mass atrocities are going on. I would hope that America could lead and exercise the options necessary to stop these atrocities, as has been the actions of the United States of America in the past in both Republican and Democrat administrations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator McCain. Senator Lieberman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to Secretary Panetta, General Dempsey. On this question of what to do in Syria, I'm of like mind with Senator McCain, except on the unfortunate reference to the brave graduates of Yale University. I'll have to talk to him later about that. And perhaps we are of like mind because we went through in the 90s together the similar circumstances in Bosnia and Kosovo, as Secretary Panetta, certainly in Bosnia, you were there in the White House. I would say, and in each case, the American entrance into that conflict was late, but had a very constructive effect, and a civil war was terminated. In my opinion, the humanitarian and strategic arguments for the United States to be involved, to help lead an international effort, which is military, to stop the slaughter in Syria are actually greater than they were in the case of either Bosnia or Kosovo. There obviously is, as great as those were, there obviously is the humanitarian crisis, which is that he's, as we've all agreed, Assad is slaughtering his people, he has them outgunned, and for all we know, he'll keep doing it and not leave office until he's worn them down. Beyond that are all the strategic reasons that I think we also agree on, which is how positive it would be if Assad, who's the only ally of Iran at this critical moment, is taken down, how liberating it would be to the Lebanese people next door who have suffered under Syrian repression. There's another element to this, too, which perhaps is so unique and different that we're not giving it enough weight. In our foreign policy, we've done a lot of things over the years, including in recent years, to try to essentially regain the confidence of the Arab world, of the Muslim world. And we have here a moment where the Arab League, the Gulf Coordinating Council, Turkey are out there. I know Turkey's not the Arab world, but in the region are out there against what's happening in Syria. And I think if we seem to be holding back, and incidentally, I think those countries are out there both because they see their own strategic interest in this, but also because their people are demanding it because of the wave of change sweeping across the region. So to me, this is both humanitarian, strategic in terms of its negative effect on Iran if we can help bring Assad down, but also can help improve our relations with not just our allies in the Arab world, but the so-called Arab street. When I've been to Libya as an example, the U.S. and NATO are naturally extremely popular, and there's a lot of appreciation for it because in their hour of need, we were there. And I hope and pray that we can come to do that again with regard to Syria. I agree this is not something we should do alone, but the truth is without American leadership helping to organize this coalition and being prepared, as you've suggested, to provide some of the critical resources that we have, it won't happen in a timely way, and it won't be successful. I want to say very briefly, to me, I have kept saying that the factors that led us into Libya with an international coalition are here. They're happening. I mean, we worried mostly about a humanitarian disaster. They're here. But, Secretary Panetta, you've cited a few reasons why Syria is different from Libya, and respectfully, I want to offer a different view. One is that there was widespread support in the Security Council and the Arab League for military intervention in Libya. No such consensus exists regarding Syria. That's literally true. On the other, and that's particularly because of Russia and China and what they're doing in the UN. But within the Arab League, there's clearly a lot of interest in a military intervention in Syria. Same is true of the Gulf Coordinating Council. And I take it that the Saudis and Qataris are thinking of beginning to arm the Syrian opposition as well. The other thing I want to say is that Kosovo, as we all remember, the U.S. with a coalition of
without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week I came to the floor to talk about how free enterprise helps people achieve earned success and thus helps them pursue true happiness. Today I want to talk about another moral benefit of free enterprise. Its effectiveness in reducing poverty and promoting economic mobility. This is an important conversation to have since President Obama has made income and class inequality the centerpieces of his re-election campaign. For example, in his Sottawatomie, Kansas speech last year, he said, and I quote, "This is a make-or-break moment for the middle class and all those who are fighting to get into the middle class. I believe that this country succeeds when everyone gets a fair shot, when everyone does their fair share, and when everyone plays by the same rules," end of quote. He followed up with similar themes in the 2012 State of the Union speech, saying that he believes, again, quote, "in an America where hard work paid off, responsibility was rewarded, and anyone could make it if they tried, no matter who you were, where you came from, or how you started out," end of quote. Of course, these are quintessential American values, in no dispute. But the President's soaring rhetoric is at odds with his main policy, which is to achieve greater economic equality not by equal opportunity, but through forced redistribution of wealth. For example, the President has proposed a litany of tax increases, such as the so-called Buffett rule, higher marginal income tax rates, and higher taxes on investment. Now, these new taxes don't lift anybody up, but they do tear some people down. So the President also proposes more government spending to redistribute the new tax dollars collected. Redistributionist programs, of course, have a role as government safety nets. They help, for example, people who are ill, temporarily down on their luck, or not able-bodied. But unfortunately, they do not cure poverty. If they did, poverty would no longer exist in America. The only permanent cure for poverty and the only system capable of producing massive increases in economic mobility is free enterprise. Senator Marco Rubio put it well when he said, and I quote, "The free enterprise system has lifted more people out of poverty than all the government anti-poverty programs combined," end of quote. As we'll see in a moment, economic data confirm this is true. As Arthur Brooks and Peter Werner wrote in their book called Wealth and Justice, The Morality of Democratic Capitalism, before the rise of free enterprise, that is, for most of human history, life was, and I'm quoting now, bleak, cruel, and short, end of quote. Life expectancy was low, infant mortality was high, disease was rampant, and food was scarce. Education was only for the wealthy. Indeed, the wealthy were the only people who lived in relative comfort. But the emergence of free enterprise roughly 2 centuries ago helped to change all that. As the free enterprise system took root, particularly in Western Europe, protectionist measures eased, trade increased, and businesses accumulated capital to grow and create new jobs. People pursued their self-interests, free of state coercion or corruption, and the economic benefits flowed to every strata of society. As Brooks and Werner wrote, quote, "Markets, precisely because they are wealth-generating, also end up being wealth-distributing," end of quote. By every universal measure, life has improved dramatically in free market societies. Literacy, basic living standards, and life expectancy have increased, while disease and starvation have plummeted. Child labor has been eradicated. As free enterprise has spread during the last 2 centuries, the world's average per capita income has skyrocketed by about 10 times. These are major moral achievements. Yes, some people are richer than others, and that is true in all nations, whether characterized as market economies or not. But where it exists, free enterprise has helped make the poor make tremendous gains, and they continue to climb. In the modern era of globalization, we've seen this on an unprecedented scale. Since 1970, as economic freedom has grown in developing countries like China and India, the number of people living on $1 a day has plunged 80%, according to a recent study. What about President Obama's arguments that free enterprise has harmed middle-class prosperity? Over the past quarter century, economic studies have shown otherwise. Indeed, as Hoover Institution fellow Henry Now pointed out in a recent Wall Street Journal article, middle-income earners have become richer, and many have leaped into the upper middle class. Between 1980 and 2007, a period that now calls the Great Expansion, the United States grew by more than 3% per year and created more than 50 million new jobs, massively expanding a middle class of workers, in his words. And he continues, per capita income increased by 65%, and household income went up substantially in all income categories. In the past 3 decades, households making more than $105,000 in inflation-adjusted dollars doubled to 24% from 11%. These are remarkable increases in wealth. What policies produced this expansion? Quote, precisely the free market policies of deregulation and lower marginal income tax rates that President Obama decries, end of quote. Now writes, if the President truly wants to increase class mobility and prosperity and build on the successes of the Great Expansion, then he must turn away from the statist policies that have dominated his 3 years in office. As Brooks and Werner write, quote, the answer is not less capitalism, it is better capitalists, end of quote. And I would add that that includes the President and his advisors. Most fundamentally, our policies must reward hard work and merit, for the simple reason that people are more successful and industrious when they get to keep more of the fruits of their labor. That's what we call earned success. Their prosperity flows to others when they open businesses, create jobs and new products, compete for workers, raise wages, and invest their profits, which can then be lent to other entrepreneurs. But when market forces are restricted, when taxes are too high and regulations are too stifling, entrepreneurship loses its appeal. If people think outcomes are predetermined by the government, they don't have incentives to compete. A 2005 study by economists Alberto Alesina and George Marios Angelitos underscores the point.
They found that beliefs about meritocratic rewards are self-fulfilling. They concluded that if a society thinks that people have a right to enjoy the fruits of their effort, it will choose low taxes and have lower tolerance for redistribution. Effort will be high in these places. Conversely, they found that if citizens believe that the system is rigged and that luck and connections, not merit, are the key determinants of success, then they will demand forced wealth redistribution, and effort will be lower in these places. Simply put, if people think the system is inherently unfair, it will wind up that way. That's precisely what has happened in countries like Spain and Greece, where outcomes are divorced from effort, and to a large measure bureaucrats and special interests dictate who gets economic rewards. Since everyone does better when effort is rewarded, then protecting merit-based success is a moral issue. Indeed, the first American immigrants left countries with too little opportunity for advancement to come here and earn rewards based on merit and be the masters of their own destiny. Polls have shown that over the years, Americans have not grown tired of the merit-based system, but instinctively support it. U2 singer Bono colorfully explained why individual determinism in America is so great. Quote, "In America," he says, "the guy looks up to the mansion on the hill and says, 'One day, if I really work hard, I'm going to live in the mansion on the hill.' In Dublin," he says, "they look at the mansion on the hill and say, 'One day I'm going to get that guy.'" End of his quotation. Well, free markets breed a culture of aspiration and mobility in which people reject the politics of envy and instead focus on their own advancement and their own success. If our goal is to foster such a positive culture of achievement, then we must eschew class warfare in favor of the free market policies that have done so much to boost